I sat in a suffocating courtroom, watching my reputation burn under the gaze of the press. My brother leaned in, smiling like he had carved my epitaph, and whispered that I was finished. Then the judge looked up and asked a single question that drained the blood from my brother's face. That inquiry proved that if I was truly bankrupt, someone had lied to a federal court about a $4.2 million loan, and the price of that lie was our family empire. My name is Madison Cook, and as I stood in the center of the federal bankruptcy court in Charlotte, I could physically feel the weight of 36 pairs of eyes drilling into the back of my blazer. I was 36 years old. I was the founder of Haven Ridge Development Company. And if the piece of paper currently resting under the sweaty palm of my brother's lawyer was to be believed, I was also destitute, incompetent, and a financial leech on the noble Monroe family legacy. The courtroom air was recycled and stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and old anxiety. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, yet the gallery was packed. This was not normal for a bankruptcy hearing. Usually, these proceedings are dry. Administrative affairs attended only by board clerks and desperate creditors. But today was different. Today was theater. My brother had made sure of that. I kept my hands clasped on the table in front of me, forcing my knuckles to remain the color of skin rather than the bone white of panic. My heart was a different story. It was hammering against my ribs with a violence that made me worry the microphone on the defense table might pick up the rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. To my right sat Derek Monroe, my older brother, the golden boy. He shifted in his chair, the expensive fabric of his custom navy suit whispering against the wood. He smelled of sandalwood and the specific, acrid confidence of a man who believes he has already won. He leaned toward me, crossing the invisible boundary line between plaintiff and defendant. He did not look at me directly. He looked past my ear, playing to the cameras at the back of the room. "Prepare to be paraded," he whispered. The words were soft, barely an exhale, but they hit me like a physical slap. It was a threat, but it was also a promise. Derek had not just come to sue me. He had come to dismantle me. He wanted to strip the flesh of my reputation from the bone, right here in front of the local press, the real estate sharks, and the bloggers who fed on corporate gossip like vultures on a carcass. Behind him, in the first row of the gallery, sat our parents. I had made the mistake of glancing back at them when the bailiff called the court to order. My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a prop she must have pulled from the depths of a drawer she hadn't opened since her own mother's funeral. She was crying on cue, performing the role of the heartbroken matriarch, watching her wayward daughter face justice. My father stood next to her, a statue carved from granite and disappointment. He wore his boardroom face cold, impenetrable, devoid of affection. They were not here to support me. They were here as VIP spectators to a public execution. "All rise," the bailiff had droned, and we had risen, but the heaviness in my legs had nothing to do with gravity. Now, we were 20 minutes into the opening statements, and Miles Croft, the Monroe family's longtime attorney, was putting on a masterclass in fiction. Croft was a man who wore bow ties without irony and spoke with a syrupy southern drawl that made poison sound like peach tea. He paced the floor in front of Judge Leland Hart, gesturing broadly with a manicured hand. "Your Honor," Croft said, his voice dropping to a register of sorrowful reluctance, "this is not a filing we make lightly. The Monroe family values privacy above all else. But when a member of that family accepts a loan of $4.2 million to salvage a failing business venture and then refuses to acknowledge that debt, while the company spirals into insolvency, hard choices must be made." $4.2 million. He said the number slowly, enunciating every syllable. He wanted it to hang in the air. He wanted the reporters in the back row to scribble it down in their notepads. He wanted the tweet to go out before he even finished his sentence. The plaintiff, Mr. Derek Monroe, extended this lifeline out of brotherly love, Croft continued, pausing to look affectionately at Derek, who managed to look suitably tragic. He sought to save Haven Ridge Development from its own mismanagement, but as the evidence will show, Ms. Cook's company is a shell. It is underwater. It has ceased to be a functional entity and has become a drain on the creditors who trusted her. We are asking for an involuntary Chapter 7 ruling to stop the bleeding. I stared straight ahead at the Great Seal of the United States hanging behind the judge's bench. Mismanagement. A shell. Underwater. Every word was a calculated lie designed to trigger a specific panic in the market. In the construction and development world, perception is currency. If the subcontractors think you cannot pay, they walk off the job. If the suppliers think you are insolvent, the steel and the lumber stop arriving. If the city council thinks you are unstable, the permits vanish. You do not actually have to be broke to go bankrupt. You just have to look broke enough for everyone to abandon you. Derek knew this. My father knew this. They were not trying to get $4.2 million back, because the money had never existed in the first place. They were trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Beside me, my lawyer, Dana Whitlock, remained perfectly still. Dana was the antithesis of Miles Croft. She did not pace. She did not use flowery adjectives. She wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She was the best corporate litigator in Charlotte, not because she was loud, but because she was lethal. While Croft droned on about familial duty and financial recklessness, Dana did not object. She did not scoff. She simply watched the judge. Judge Leland Hart was a man in his 60s, with a face that looked like it had been eroded by decades of listening to lawyers lie. He sat high up on the bench, peering over reading glasses that had slid down the bridge of his nose. He had barely moved since the session began. He was flipping through the initial motion filed by Derek's team, his expression bored, almost sleepy. Croft finally wound down his opening monologue. In conclusion, Your Honor, the insolvency of Haven Ridge Development is not a matter of debate. It is a matter of arithmetic. We simply ask the court to recognize the reality that Ms. Cook refuses to see. Croft sat down. Derek patted him on the arm. My mother let out a small, audible sob from the gallery. Ms. Whitlock, Judge Hart said. He did not look up from the papers. Does the defense wish to make an opening statement? Dana stood up. She did not walk to the podium. She stood at our table, her hands resting on the cool wood. We do, Your Honor, Dana said. Her voice was cool, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. But we believe we can save the court's valuable time. The plaintiff's entire argument rests on the assertion that Haven Ridge Development Company is insolvent and that Ms. Cook is currently unable to meet her financial obligations. That is the definition of bankruptcy, Ms. Whitlock, the judge drawled, finally looking up. Indeed, Dana said. She reached into her briefcase. She did not pull out a speech. She did not pull out a laptop. She pulled out a single, thick binder. It was 3 inches thick, bound in black plastic. She placed it on the defense table. It made a heavy, dull thud that echoed in the quiet room. It sounded like a brick hitting the floor. It sounded like a weapon. This filing, Dana said, tapping the binder with one finger, contains the current, audited financials of Haven Ridge Development as of 8 o'clock this morning. It also contains the certified bank statements for the last 12 months. Miles Croft chuckled from the other table. Creative accounting can hide a lot of sins, Your Honor. Dana ignored him. She picked up the binder and walked it to the bench, handing it to the bailiff, who passed it up to Judge Hart. Mr. Croft claims my client is destitute, Dana said, turning to face the gallery for the first time. She looked briefly at Derek, then at my parents. He claims her company is a shell. He claims she has no liquidity. Judge Hart opened the binder. The room went silent. The only sound was the rustle of paper as the judge turned the first page, then the second. Then he stopped. He adjusted his glasses. He leaned forward. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. The air in the room seemed to thin out, making it hard to breathe. I watched the judge's eyes scan the page. I knew exactly what he was looking at. I knew exactly which line item his finger was hovering over. Derek stopped smiling. He shifted in his seat, looking at Croft. Croft frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his smooth, tanned face. Judge Hart looked up. He did not look at Dana. He did not look at Croft. He looked directly at me. His expression had changed. The boredom was gone. In its place was a sharp, piercing curiosity, bordering on confusion. He tapped his pen against the open binder. "Ms. Cook," the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. I stood up. My legs felt steady now. The fear was still there, but it was hardening into something else, something cold and useful. "Yes, Your Honor. I am looking at an entry here regarding a project codenamed Rivergate," Judge Hart said. I saw Derek flinch. It was a small movement, a tightening of his shoulders, but from 3 feet away, it was unmistakable. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. The judge looked back down at the document, then up at me again. "Am I to understand," he asked, speaking very slowly, "that you are the developer of record for the Rivergate Renewal Project?" The room went deadly quiet. Even the reporters stopped typing. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "The public-private partnership with the city?" the judge asked. "Yes, sir." "The project," the judge continued, his voice rising slightly at the end, "that was officially announced by the mayor's office last month, the one capitalized at 'let me check this figure.'" He looked down at the page again, squinting as if he could not believe the number printed there. $122 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. $122 million. At the plaintiff's table. Miles Croft blinked. Once, twice, rapidly, he looked down at his own papers, shuffling them frantically as if searching for a counter-argument that did not exist. Derek went absolutely still, his face, previously flushed with the anticipation of victory, drained of color. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at the judge, his mouth slightly open, the confident smirk erased as if it had never been there. Behind him, I heard a sharp intake of breath, the sound of a purse sliding off a lap. My mother had dropped her tissues. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing clear in the silence. "My company was awarded the Rivergate contract 45 days ago. The initial funding tranche of $18 million was deposited into the Haven Ridge escrow account last Friday. It is listed on page 4 of the document you are holding." Judge Hart looked at page 4. He nodded slowly. Then he turned his gaze to Miles Croft. The look he gave the opposing counsel was not friendly. It was the look of a man who realizes his court is being used for a game he did not agree to play. "Mr. Croft," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "If Ms. Cook's company has just secured a $120 million contract, backed by municipal bonds and private equity, how exactly is she insolvent? And more importantly, how did your client forget to mention this massive asset in his filing?" Derek's hands were gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the judge anymore. He was looking at me. And for the first time in my life, the look in my brother's eyes wasn't condescension, it was fear. I met his gaze and held it. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The script they had written for today, the story of the incompetent little sister needing a bailout, had a hole in it, a hole the size of a city block. They had assumed I was the same person I was at the dinner table, quiet, submissive, and predictable. They had assumed they knew everything about my business because they assumed I was too stupid to keep secrets. But I was a builder. And builders know that if the foundation is rotten, the whole house comes down. "Well, Mr. Croft," Judge Hart pressed, leaning over the bench, "I am waiting for an answer, because right now, it looks like you are asking me to declare a company bankrupt when it is sitting on one of the largest development contracts in the state." Croft stood up, buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers. "Your Honor, there may have been an oversight regarding the recent developments." "An oversight," the judge repeated, eyebrows raised. an oversight of $120 million. I sat back down. My heart was still beating hard, but the rhythm had changed. It wasn't the erratic drum of panic anymore. It was the steady, heavy beat of a war drum. This was just the beginning. They thought the $4.2 million lie would bury me, but they had forgotten to check if I was already standing on higher ground. I looked back at my parents. My father was no longer looking at the judge. He was looking at the back of Derek's head, and his eyes were narrowing. My mother had stopped crying. She was staring at me, her mouth a thin, hard line. They knew. In that moment, they all knew. The parade Derek had promised was still happening, but the route had changed, and I wasn't the one being marched to the scaffold. To understand why my brother tried to bury me in federal court, you have to understand the Sunday dinners. You have to understand the architecture of the Monroe family table, where affection was a limited resource and approval was a currency that had to be earned, coin by heavy coin. For most of my life, that table was the center of my universe. It was a massive slab of mahogany that sat in the dining room of our house in the suburbs of Charlotte, a room that smelled perpetually of lemon oil and expensive red wine. Every Sunday at 6 o'clock, we took our assigned seats. My father sat at the head, of course. My mother sat to his right, Derek sat to his left, and I sat across from Derek, in the seat that always felt slightly lower than the others. Though I knew for a fact the chairs were identical, the dynamic was as fixed as the foundation of the house itself. Derek was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets hoping to catch a bit of his reflection. Derek was the definition of the golden child. He was 2 years older than me, with the kind of easy, symmetrical handsomeness that makes life unfairly smooth. He had a golf swing that charmed investors and a laugh that made bad jokes sound witty. From the time he was 12, he was introduced not just as a son, but as the heir. "This is Derek," my father would say to his business partners, resting a heavy hand on my brother's shoulder. "He is going to take Monroe Commercial Holdings to the next level one day." I was usually introduced as an afterthought. "And this is Madison. She does well in school." That was the delineation. Derek was the future. I was the student. Derek was the operator. I was the observer. But the thing about being the observer is that you see the cracks in the walls long before anyone else. While Derek was busy learning how to order the most expensive scotch and how to mirror my father's handshake, I was obsessing over the actual work. I fell in love with the unsexy side of development. I loved the zoning maps. I loved the demographic shift reports. I loved looking at a dilapidated warehouse district and seeing not a ruin, but a rhythm of potential residential density and retail flow. I remember one dinner in particular. I was 26, fresh out of a master's program in urban planning, and working as a junior analyst at a firm downtown, pointedly not working for the family business yet. Derek was already a vice president at Monroe Commercial, a title he had received alongside his diploma. We were eating roast beef. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the scrape of silver on china. "I saw the quarterly report for the South Side retail strip," Derek said, taking a sip of wine. He didn't look at me. He looked at father. "Tenants are complaining about foot traffic. I think we should squeeze them on the lease renewals. Make up the margin there." My father nodded, slicing his meat with surgical precision. "Good instinct, son. Don't let them get comfortable." I should have kept my mouth shut. I knew the rhythm, I knew my lines, but I had spent 3 weeks analyzing that exact neighborhood for my own job. "The foot traffic isn't down because the tenants are lazy," I said. I kept my voice even, staring at my water glass. "It is down because the transit authority moved the bus stop 2 blocks west 3 months ago, and the streetlights on that block have been out for 6 weeks. People don't feel safe walking there after dark. Squeezing the tenants on rent won't fix the margin. It will just cause vacancies you can't fill." The silence that followed was total. My father slowly put down his fork. He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and irritation, the way one looks at a dog that has suddenly started walking on its hind legs. "Is that right?" he asked. "I pulled the city data," I continued, feeling a flush of heat climb my neck. if you petitioned the city to fix the lights and maybe subsidized a shuttle from the new transit hub, the traffic would rebound by 30% in a quarter. It is a logistics problem, not a pricing problem. I looked up, hoping for a nod, hoping for a "good catch, Madison." Instead, Derek let out a short, sharp laugh. "Listen to her," Derek said, grinning at our mother. "She thinks she's the mayor, always with the charts and the little civic projects. I am talking about asset management." "Derek," I said, my voice tightening. "You are talking about charity," my father corrected. His voice was low, the amusement gone. "Madison, honey, you have a good brain for school. We know that. But the real world isn't a spreadsheet. You don't solve business problems by holding hands with the city council. You solve them by asserting leverage. But the data is a tool." He cut me off. "It is not the master. You need to learn the difference between being a librarian and being a developer. A developer has gut instinct." He gestured to Derek. "Your brother understands people. He understands the deal. You are getting lost in the weeds." "Con," my mother chimed in, using her soft, weaponized voice. "Your father is right. You shouldn't worry your pretty head about the heavy lifting. Why don't you see if you can help Derek with his filing system? I am sure he could use someone organized to keep his office tidy." I felt the air leave my lungs. A master's degree, 3 years of top-tier analysis work, and my mother was suggesting I become my brother's secretary. Derek leaned back, swirling his wine. "That's actually not a bad idea," he drawled. "I do need someone to organize the archives. Maybe you can be the queen of projects. You can color code everything." He told that story for years, at Christmas parties, at country club mixers. My little sister, the data nerd, she wanted to redesign the city bus routes to save a strip mall. Everyone would laugh. They laughed because they thought it was cute. They laughed because in their world, a woman who cared about the mechanics of the city was adorable, while a man who cared about the profit was serious. I stopped bringing up my ideas at dinner. I stopped bringing up my promotions. I stopped trying to show them the maps I drew late at night. The vision I had for a company that didn't just extract value from a neighborhood, but actually built it. There was only one person at that table who didn't laugh. My Aunt Marin. Marin was my father's younger sister, a woman who wore sharp blazers and smoked thin cigarettes on the back patio, even though my mother hated it. She had never married, and in the Monroe family, that was considered a tragic flaw. But she had her own money, a small inheritance she had invested shrewdly in tech stocks in the 90s, and that gave her immunity. That night, after the roast beef and the humiliation, I went out to the patio to hide. I was shaking with rage, tears stinging my eyes. Marin was there, staring out at the manicured lawn, the smoke from her cigarette curling into the humid night air. She didn't turn around when I stepped out. "He is wrong, you know," she said. Her voice was raspy, deeper than my mother's. I wiped my face quickly. "It doesn't matter. He's the boss." "He is a dinosaur," Marin said. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, seeing right through the carefully constructed mask I tried to wear. "He thinks the world is still made of handshake deals and old boys clubs. He doesn't see that the ground is shifting, but you do. They just want me to support him," I whispered. "That is all I am to them. Derek's safety net, the backup plan." Marin took a long drag. "In this family, you are only loved as long as you play the role they wrote for you. For Derek, the role is king. For you, the role is subject. If you stay in that seat, Madison, you will suffocate. You have a fire in you that scares them. That is why they mock you. People only mock what threatens them." "I can't leave," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It's the family business. It's everything." "It is their business," Marin corrected. "It will never be yours, unless you make your own." She flicked her cigarette butt into the garden, a tiny spark that flared and died. "If you ever decide to jump, child, make sure you clear the fence. Don't look back. And for God's sake, don't take a dime of their money when you go. If they pay for your ticket, They own the destination. That conversation planted the seed. It took 2 more years for it to germinate. 2 years of watching Derek fail upward, watching him make disastrous acquisitions based on ego, while my father applauded his boldness. I watched them ignore the sustainability trends, ignore the shift toward mixed-use zoning, ignore the very data I lived and breathed. The breaking point wasn't an explosion, it was a whimper. I had brought a proposal to my father, a small, adaptive reuse project I wanted to run under the Monroe umbrella. It was solid, it was safe, it was profitable. He didn't even read it. He handed it to Derek. "Let your brother take a look," he said. "If he thinks it's cute, maybe he will let you manage the decoration." Derek lost the file. He literally lost it. 2 weeks later, he asked me if I had a copy because he needed scratch paper. That was the day I walked into the bank. I had $70,000 in savings, money I had hoarded from my salary, eating cheap takeout and driving a 10-year-old sedan while Derek leased a new Porsche every year. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I applied for a small business administration loan. I sat across from a loan officer who looked at my business plan, really looked at it, and didn't ask who my father was. He asked about my cap rates. He asked about my construction timeline. He treated me like a developer. When I got the approval letter for the loan, I didn't feel joy. I felt a terrifying, electric vertigo. I resigned from the firm I was working for. I incorporated Haven Ridge Development Company. And then I went to the house to tell my parents. I didn't ask for their blessing. I just told them. "I am striking out on my own," I said. We were in the living room. The TV was on. Muted. My mother looked like I had slapped her. "But why, Derek was just saying he might have a spot for you in leasing next year." "I don't want a spot in leasing," I said. "I want to build." My father laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "You will be back in 6 months," he said. "Real estate eats little girls alive. Madison, you don't have the stomach for the risk." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote a check for $10,000 and held it out to me. "Here, for your rent, so you don't starve when this little experiment fails." I looked at the check. I looked at his smirk. I looked at Derek, who was lounging on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, barely paying attention to the sister who was walking out of his life. I remembered Marin's voice. "If they pay for your ticket, they own the destination." "No, thank you," I said. My father frowned. "Don't be proud. It's foolish." "It's not pride," I said. "It's leverage. You taught me that. If I take your money, I take your input. And I don't want either." I walked out of that house with my heart hammering against my ribs, a sensation that would become my constant companion for the next 5 years. I drove away in my old car, leaving behind the mahogany table, the heavy red wine, and the role of the obedient daughter. I thought I had escaped them. I thought that by refusing their money, I had immunized myself against their control. I didn't realize then that for people like my father and Derek, control isn't just about money, it is about gravity. They couldn't stand that a planet had spun out of orbit. They couldn't stand that I was creating my own gravity. And as I drove toward the tiny, windowless office I had rented above a dry cleaner, I had no idea that my success wouldn't just prove them wrong. It would make them dangerous. I thought I was just starting a business. In reality, I was starting a war. They just waited until I had something worth destroying before they fired the first shot. The smell of perk and steam from the dry cleaner downstairs eventually faded, replaced by the sharper, cleaner sense of fresh toner, blueprint paper, and the stale coffee that fuels legitimate ambition. The transition of Haven Ridge Development Company from a desperate idea into a functional machine did not happen overnight, but looking back, it felt like a time-lapse video where the steel beams rise and the glass skins the skeleton of a building in seconds. I stopped being just Madison, the girl who liked maps. I became Madison Cook, the woman you called when you wanted a mixed-use site to actually work. I hired a structural engineer named Silas, a man with 50 years of experience who had been pushed out of his old firm for being too slow. He wasn't slow, he was thorough. I hired a zoning attorney who knew the city code better than the people who wrote it. We were a small team, A ragtag collection of the overlooked and the undervalued, operating out of a renovated loft space in the South End that I had secured for a song because the HVAC was broken. We fixed the HVAC ourselves. Our first real win was a retrofit of an old textile mill into 42 residential units. It was the kind of project Monroe Commercial Holdings would have laughed at. The margins were tight. The environmental remediation was a headache, and the timeline was aggressive. But we delivered it 3 weeks early and 4% under budget. When the ribbon was cut, my father was not there, Derek was not there, but the city councilor for District 3 was, and so was the vice president of the regional bank that had backed me. "You have an eye for the bones of a place," the banker told me, shaking my hand firmly. "Most developers just see the land value. You see the life." That compliment meant more to me than 2 decades of my father's silence. We moved from the textile mill to a block of affordable housing combined with ground floor retail, then a boutique hotel in the arts district. My signature was becoming clear, sustainable, community integrated, and data-driven. I wasn't guessing where people wanted to live. I was analyzing traffic patterns, utility usage, and demographic shifts to prove it. While Haven Ridge was climbing the ladder, rung by sweaty rung, Monroe Commercial Holdings was beginning to slip. It wasn't a crash, it was a slow leak. My father and Derek were still operating on the business model of the 1990s. They bought big, flashy retail centers and assumed the tenants would line up. But the world had changed. E-commerce was eating their lunch. Their flagship asset, the Northwood Plaza, was bleeding. It was a massive concrete island of big box stores that was currently 30% vacant. I heard the whispers in the industry. I saw the names of their tenants popping up on bankruptcy watch lists. Worse, I knew how my father structured his debt. He loved variable rate loans because the initial payments were low. He called it smart leverage, but the Federal Reserve was hiking interest rates, and that smart leverage was turning into a noose. Derek, however, was still playing the role of the tycoon. I would see his Instagram stories, golf trips to Scotland, bottle service in Miami, a new luxury SUV every 6 months. He was winning the image war, but he was losing the war of the balance sheet. In the local business journals, the tone of the articles about him had shifted. They used to call him the heir. Now they called him the playboy developer. And then, the comparison started. It began with a small profile in the Charlotte Business Journal. The headline read, "A Tale of Two Monroes While the Son Parties. The Daughter Builds." I didn't write it. I didn't pitch it. But when I read it, sipping my coffee at 6 in the morning, I felt a jolt of vindication so sharp it almost hurt. The article detailed Haven Ridge's lean operating costs versus the bloated overhead of the family firm. It quoted a subcontractor who said, "If you work for Derek, you get paid in 90 days and a headache. If you work for Madison, you get paid on delivery and a thank you note." I knew that article would be printed out and slammed onto the mahogany dining table. I knew my name was being cursed in the house where I grew up, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I was hunting a whale, the Rivergate Renewal Project. It was the largest public-private partnership the city had offered in a decade, a sprawling, 120-acre stretch of industrial wasteland along the river that the city wanted to transform into a green eco-district with residential towers, a tech campus, and public parks. The price tag was astronomical. The competition was fierce. National firms from New York and Chicago were flying in jets to pitch for it. Haven Ridge was the underdog. We were the local shop, but we had the data. I spent 3 months sleeping on the office couch. My team and I built a proposal that wasn't just a construction plan, it was a manifesto for the future of Charlotte. We mapped every tree. We calculated the carbon footprint of every brick. We showed how the project would pay for itself in tax revenue within 7 years. The presentation day was a blur of adrenaline. I stood in front of the city council and the urban planning committee, wearing a suit I couldn't really afford, and I spoke for 40 minutes without looking at a single note card. I poured everything I knew, everything I had learned while sitting silent at my father's table, into that microphone. 2 weeks later, the call came. I was on a job site, wearing mud-caked boots, shouting over the noise of a jackhammer. My phone vibrated. It was the mayor's chief of staff. "Ms. Cook," she said, "we have made our decision. The council voted unanimously. Rivergate is yours." I dropped my phone in the mud. I had to scramble to pick it up, wiping the screen on my jeans. My hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the device. We had won. We had beaten the giants. We had secured a project capitalized at over $120 million. The press release went out the next morning at 8 o'clock. By 8:15, my inbox was broken. By 8:30, the office phone was ringing nonstop. LinkedIn requests, investment offers, congratulations from people who hadn't spoken to me since high school. And at 11 o'clock, my personal cell phone rang. Caller ID, father. I stared at the screen. The vibration felt like a warning buzzer. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Caller ID, mother. I picked up. Madison. Her voice was breathless, high-pitched, the tone she used when she wanted to pretend everything was perfect. "Oh, honey. We just saw the news. It is on the television right now." "Hello, Mom," I said, leaning against my desk, watching my team high-five in the conference room through the glass wall. "We are so proud," she gushed. The words sounded foreign in her mouth. "Your father is just beaming. He says he always knew you had his grit." I almost laughed. "He told me I would be back in 6 months. Mom, it has been 5 years." "Oh, stop living in the past." She dismissed my memory with a breezy sigh. "Listen, darling, we are going to have a celebratory dinner tonight. The club, 7 o'clock. Just family. You have to come. Your father wants to toast you." I should have said no. I should have stayed in my office with the people who actually helped me build this. But a small, stupid part of me, the part that was still the little girl at the lower end of the table, wanted to see it. I wanted to see them acknowledge me. I walked into the country club that evening wearing the same suit I had worn to the pitch. Derek and my parents were already seated at their usual table by the window. The atmosphere was weirdly festive. My father stood up and hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace that smelled of desperation. Derek raised a glass of scotch. "To the heavy hitter," Derek said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Rivergate, that is a monster. Maddie, seriously, good kill." We ordered, we ate. They asked polite questions about the timeline. They didn't interrupt me. It felt like the Twilight Zone. Then, the check came, and with it, the pivot. "You know," my father said, leaning back and tenting his fingers, "a project this size, it is a lot for a boutique shop to handle. The liability alone is a nightmare." "I have excellent insurance," I said, putting down my fork, "and a legal team." Of course, he soothed. "But the city, they get nervous with small firms. They like stability. They like legacy." He looked at Derek. Derek straightened his tie. "We were thinking," my father continued, his voice dropping to that reasonable, boardroom tone, "it would be a shame for you to stumble on the execution because you were understaffed. Monroe Commercial has the infrastructure. We have the vendor relationships. We were thinking we could come on as a strategic partner." I went very still. "A partner. A consultant," Derek interjected quickly. "I could come on as a co-lead, handle the optics, the political side. You know I am good with the city boys. You handle the dirt and the math. I handle the ribbon cuttings and the investors. We rebranded as a Monroe family project. It solidifies your standing, and it reminds everyone that the Monroe name owns this town. Plus," my mother added, reaching across to touch my hand, "it would be so good for Derek. He has had a rough quarter with the market turning. This would, well, it would look very good for the family if you two were united." There it was. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to harvest me. They needed Rivergate. They needed the cash flow, the press, the momentum. They needed to graft Derek's dying branch onto my healthy tree to keep him green. They wanted me to do the work, take the risk, and let Derek take the bow. Just like the bus routes, just like the filing system. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. And finally, I looked at Derek. "No," I said, The word hung over the table, heavier than the chandelier. "Excuse me," my father said, his smile freezing. "No," I repeated. "I have a team, I have the vendors, and I have the contract. The city awarded it to Haven Ridge, not Monroe Commercial. I am not bringing on partners." "Madison," my father snapped, the mask slipping. "Don't be selfish. Your brother needs this exposure. The company needs this." "That sounds like a Monroe Commercial problem," I said, standing up. "Not a Haven Ridge problem." "You are being petty," Derek spat. The charm evaporated instantly. "You think you are hot stuff because you tricked the city council? You are going to drown out there. Madison, you need us. I have been swimming for 5 years. Derek," I said, picking up my purse, "I haven't drowned yet, and I'm not going to let you use my life jacket." I looked at Derek one last time. I expected to see the usual petulance, the spoiled anger of a child denied a toy, but I didn't see that. I saw something else. His eyes had gone flat and dark. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was cold, calculating malice. He wasn't looking at a sister he was annoyed with. He was looking at an obstacle he needed to remove. He looked like a man who realized that if he couldn't own the building, his only other option was to burn it down. "We will see how long you last," Derek said softly. I walked out of the club, my heart racing, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a bridge finally, fully burned. I got into my car and checked my phone. There was a text message from Aunt Marin. She must have heard about the dinner invitation from my mother. The message was short. "If they invited you to the table after you won, they are not hungry for your company. They are just hungry. Lock your doors." "Child?" I looked at the message, then back at the glowing windows of the country club. I started the engine. I didn't know it then, but Derek had already started making calls. The war wasn't coming. It had just walked in the front door. The notification arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was standing in the break room of Haven Ridge's office, debating between a stale bagel and a granola bar, my mind occupied with the mundane logistics of a concrete pour scheduled for Thursday. The office was humming with the low, productive buzz of my team phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the unspooling of large-format prints. It was the sound of a healthy business. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a priority email notification from the federal court system's electronic filing service. I frowned. We didn't have any active litigation. We were up to code. Our permits were clean, and our employment contracts were ironclad. I wiped a crumb from my lip and unlocked the screen. Subject notice of bankruptcy case filing. Involuntary petition. Chapter 7, Debtor Madison Cook. Haven Ridge Development Company petitioner Derek Monroe. The world didn't stop spinning, but it felt like the axis tilted violently to the left. I stared at the small screen, the blue light searing the words into my retinas. Involuntary petition. Chapter 7. That wasn't a reorganization. That was a liquidation. That was a request to the court to seize my assets, sell them off for scrap, and lock the doors. I walked back to my office, my legs moving on autopilot. I closed the door and sat down, my hands trembling as I opened the laptop to pull up the full document. The PDF loaded slowly. It was 20 pages long. Allegation, the petitioner, Derek Monroe, asserts that he extended a personal emergency loan of $4.2 million to the debtor 18 months ago to prevent operational failure. The debtor has failed to service the interest or repay the principal, and the petitioner has reason to believe the debtor is insolvent and dissipating assets. $4.2 million. I laughed. It was a short, breathless sound that bordered on hysteria. I had never borrowed $4 million from anyone, let alone Derek. I hadn't borrowed $4 from Derek since I was 12. I scrolled down to Exhibit A. It was a promissory note. It was a masterpiece of forgery. It was printed on heavy, scanned letterhead. The font was Standard Legal Times New Roman. The terms were predatory, but believable, a high interest rate, a balloon payment due last month, and there, at the bottom, was my signature. I touched the screen. It looked exactly like my signature. The loop of the M, the sharp cross of the T. If I didn't know for a fact that I hadn't signed it, I might have believed it myself. It was too perfect. Real documents have coffee stains, or a slightly crooked scan line, or a hurried scrawl. This looked like it had been drafted by a machine designed to simulate human failure. Before I could even process the legal implications, my desk phone rang, then my cell phone, then the desk phone again. I looked at my computer screen. A Google alert. I had set up for Haven Ridge, had just triggered. Charlotte Biz, beat Rivergate developer in financial ruin, brother files to force bankruptcy. I clicked the link. The article had been posted 6 minutes ago. 6 minutes. The court filing had only hit the system 10 minutes ago. The article was vicious. It didn't use words like allegedly, nearly enough. It painted a picture of a desperate, flailing girl boss who had bitten off more than she could chew with the massive Rivergate project and had secretly begged her successful family for a bailout. It quoted an anonymous source close to the family saying, "It is tragic. Really, we just want to stop her from digging a deeper hole." The quote sounded like Miles Croft, their lawyer. It had his cadence. My cell phone was now vibrating continuously, dancing across the surface of my desk. I looked at the caller ID. It wasn't family. It was Jim Vance, the owner of the excavation company we had hired for Rivergate. I picked up. "Hello, Jim." "Madison," Jim said. He didn't say hello. His voice was tight. "I just saw the alert. My accounts receivable girl is asking if we need to pull the crews off the site." "Jim, it is not true," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, though my chest felt like it was in a vice. "It is a frivolous filing. There is no loan. I have the liquidity." "It says 4.2 million, Madison," Jim said. "That is a big number to make up." And Chapter 7. "If the feds lock your accounts, I don't get paid on Friday. I can't float a crew of 40 guys on a promise. Your check will clear. Jim, I swear to you, I am going to pause work for 24 hours, he said. Just until I see a statement or something. I can't risk it." He hung up. A pause. That was a delay. A delay meant a missed milestone. A missed milestone meant a breach of the city contract. Another email popped up. This one was from the private equity group backing the residential tower. Subject: urgent risk assessment, update required. They were coordinating the attack. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a synchronized demolition. They knew that in the development world, perception is reality. If you look broke, you become broke. They didn't need to win in court to destroy me. They just needed to create enough smoke that everyone choked and ran for the exits. I grabbed my bag. I didn't tell my assistant where I was going. I just walked out, past the confused faces of my team, who were undoubtedly seeing the same news alerts on their phones. I drove straight to the law offices of Whitlock Associates. Dana Whitlock did not look surprised when I burst into her conference room. She was already reading a printout of the filing. She gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Madison," she said. Her voice was the only calm thing in my universe. "It is a lie," I said, tossing my bag onto the table. "Every word of it. I never borrowed money from him. That document is fake." "I know," Dana said. She didn't look up from the paper. "It is a good fake, though better than most. Croft earned his retainer on this one." "They are destroying me. Dana, Jim Vance just pulled his crew. The investors are freaking out. They are saying I am insolvent." Dana looked up then. She took off her reading glasses. "That is the point. Madison, this isn't a debt collection. This is a siege." She stood up and walked to the whiteboard. She picked up a marker. "Involuntary bankruptcy is a nuclear option. It is rarely used because if the petitioner loses, they can be liable for massive damages. Derek and Croft know this, which means they aren't trying to get to a verdict. Then what are they doing? They are trying to trigger the change of control or insolvency clauses in your Rivergate contract," Dana explained, drawing a timeline on the board. "Look at the city's master agreement, Section 14, Paragraph 3. I read it when we vetted the deal. It says that if the lead developer becomes the subject of bankruptcy proceedings, even involuntary ones that are not dismissed within 60 days, the city has the right to reassign the project to protect the public interest. I felt the blood drain from my face. 60 days. Exactly, Dana said. They don't need to prove you owe the money. They just need to keep this case alive for 60 days. They need to bog us down in discovery, motions, and hearings. If they drag it out, the city gets nervous. The city cancels your contract. And who is the only other developer in town with the capacity to step in and save the day? Derek, I whispered. Derek, she confirmed. He doesn't want $4.2 million. He wants the $120 million project, and he wants you to be so humiliated, so toxic to lenders, that you have to crawl back to the family or leave town. I stared at the whiteboard. It was evil. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of plan my father would respect. How do we stop it? I asked. If we just argue, it takes months. We need to kill it now. Dana sat back down. She tapped the promissory note with a manicured fingernail. We kill it by proving bad faith, and we do that by following the money, or rather, the lack of it. She flipped to the second page of the filing. Here is their mistake. They got arrogant. They claimed the loan was a direct transfer to your corporate operating account, $4.2 million. It never happened, I said. Right, Dana said. But in the banking world, a sum that large leaves a footprint deep enough to see from space. It triggers federal reporting requirements. It triggers SARS, suspicious activity reports. It shows up on wire logs. She looked at me intensely. I am going to file an emergency motion for expedited discovery. We are going to demand the wire confirmation numbers. We are going to demand the bank records from their side. If they can't produce a transaction ID for a $4 million wire, the judge will see this for what it is. But they will delay producing them, I said. They will say it takes time. We will force them, Dana said. But Madison, there is something else. She slid the filing across the table to me. She pointed to a paragraph on page 7. Paragraph 42. The debtor has recklessly managed funds, specifically regarding the allocation of the contingency budget for the West Sector grading, which was overspent by 15% due to poor planning. I read the sentence. I read it again. My stomach turned over. The West Sector grading, I said slowly. We only named that sector internally last week. It isn't in any public filing. It isn't in the city reports yet. Dana nodded. Her expression was grim. And the 15% overspend, is that accurate? Yes, I said. But it wasn't poor planning. It was a sinkhole we had to fill. We moved money from the landscaping budget to cover it. It was a smart fix. It doesn't matter if it was smart, Dana said softly. What matters is that it is true, and it is private. I looked at her, understanding dawning on me like a cold sweat. They have the exact number, I said. They have the internal code name for the sector. You don't just have a legal problem. Madison, Dana said, leaning forward, you have a mole. Someone in your office isn't just watching you work. They are feeding Derek the ammunition he needs to write this script. I thought of my team, the people I had hired, the people I ate lunch with, Gavin, the project manager who had been with me since the mill project, Lila, the quiet girl in finance, Marcus, the architect. Who? I asked. I don't know yet, Dana said. But look at the loan agreement again. The date. I looked. November 12th, 2 years ago. Does that date mean anything to you? Dana asked. No, I said initially. Then I paused. Wait, November 12th. That was the day I had the flu. I was out of the office for 3 days. I didn't sign anything that week. But someone had access to your digital signature file, Dana said. Or someone had access to a physical document you signed for something else, scanned it, and handed it to Croft to Photoshop. She closed the folder. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. We are going to fight the bankruptcy, Dana said. But if we want to win, we have to catch the spy, because right now, Derek knows your moves before you make them. He didn't just guess that you were vulnerable. Someone gave him the blueprint to your destruction. I stood up. The panic had receded, replaced by a cold, hard rage. I wasn't just being sued. I was being hunted from the inside. I need to go back to the office, I said. Be normal, Dana warned. Don't fire anyone. Don't scream. If you spook them, they go to ground. We need them to feel safe. We need them to make one more delivery to Derek. And then, Dana smiled. A sharp, dangerous expression that made me glad she was on my side. We feed them a poison pill. I walked out of her office into the bright afternoon sun. My phone was still buzzing with messages from terrified subcontractors. The world thought I was broke. My family thought I was finished. But as I got into my car, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a CEO who had a company to clean. I drove back to Haven Ridge, walked through the front door, and smiled at everyone I saw. I looked at their faces, wondering which one of them was selling my life to my brother for cash. Everything okay, boss? Gavin asked, looking up from a blueprint. He looked concerned, genuine. Fine, Gavin, I lied, not breaking stride. Just a clerical error. We will sort it out. I walked into my office and closed the blinds. Then I called our IT security contractor on my personal burner phone. It was time to set a trap. Returning to the Haven Ridge office felt like walking onto a film set where the genre had suddenly shifted from a workplace drama to a Cold War thriller. The physical space was the same, the exposed brick walls, the sleek glass partitions, the architectural models on the display tables, but the atmosphere had curdled. Before the lawsuit, the silence in the office had been the productive quiet of deep focus. Now, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of people holding their breath. I sat at my desk, the door open just an inch, watching my team through the gap. I had built this company on transparency. We had open book management. We shared profits. I knew the names of their spouses and their dogs, but as I watched them work, a poisonous thought took root in my mind. One of these people was selling me out. One of them was looking at me, smiling, and then forwarding my life to Derek. My lawyer, Dana Whitlock, had been clear. The specific data in Derek's lawsuit, the 15% overage on the West Sector grading, the exact dollar amount of the contingency fund could not have been guessed. It was internal data. It was protected. I started tracking everything. I became a hawk. My eyes landed first on Gavin Rooks. Gavin was my senior project manager. He was a big, boisterous guy who had been with me for 3 years. He was good at his job, but lately, his behavior had shifted. In the 48 hours since the news broke, Gavin had been acting like a man with a secret. I watched him walk to the shared printer for the third time that morning. He glanced over his shoulder, snatched the papers from the tray, and practically ran back to his cubicle. He was sweating, even though the thermostat was set to 70 degrees. Later that afternoon, he knocked on my door. "Hey, boss," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I was looking at the cash flow projections for next month." "Why?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Finance handles the projections. Gavin, you just need to manage the schedule." Right, he stammered. "It is just with the lawsuit and everything. I wanted to make sure the vendor payments for the steel delivery were secured. The supplier is asking questions. The steel is paid for," I said. "You know that." "Okay, good. I just wanted to double-check the contingency fund, just in case." He was fishing. He was asking about the exact accounts Derek was trying to freeze. When he left my office, I wrote his name on a notepad and circled it 3 times. It felt like a betrayal that physically hurt my chest. Gavin had been there when we won the Rivergate bid. He had popped the champagne. That evening, a secure email arrived from Dana. Subject: Access Logs, IT. Forensics. I opened the attachment. Dana's forensic IT specialist had pulled the server logs for the past 2 weeks. The email was brief. "We found a localized download of the Rivergate master budget file. It happened last Tuesday at 2:11 in the morning. The user credentials used to access the file belonged to Gavin Rooks." I stared at the screen. There it was. Proof. Gavin had logged in remotely in the middle of the night, downloaded the one file that contained the damning, albeit contextual financial data. And 3 days later, that data appeared in my brother's lawsuit. I wanted to fire him immediately. I wanted to march out there, throw the log in his face, and scream at him until he admitted how much Derek had paid him to stab me in the back. But I remembered Dana's warning. Don't spook them. We need to be sure. If I fired Gavin now, the leak would stop. But I wouldn't prove the conspiracy. I needed to catch the line flowing directly from my office to Derek's lawyer. I needed to prove that the information didn't just leave my building, but that it arrived on Miles Croft's desk. I needed a trap. The next morning, I called a mandatory strategy session for the senior leadership team. It was a small group, just 4 people. There was Gavin, looking pale and nervous. There was Lila Grant, my cost controller, a quiet, mousy woman in her late 20s who barely spoke above a whisper and was brilliant with spreadsheets. There was Marcus, the lead architect, who was currently sketching on his iPad and looked bored by the drama. And there was my executive assistant, Sarah. I closed the conference room door and locked it. I turned off the overhead projector. I made a show of putting my phone in the center of the table and asked them to do the same. "Listen," I said, leaning forward, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial hush. "I am going to tell you something that cannot leave this room. The lawsuit is getting aggressive. They are trying to seize our physical records and our hard drives to fish for more evidence to twist against us." Gavin looked up, his eyes wide. "Can they do that?" "They can try," I said, "but I'm not going to let them. Tonight, I am moving the physical archives and the redundant hard drive backups." "Moving them where?" Marcus asked, looking up from his iPad. "I have rented a secure, climate-controlled storage facility in Boise, Idaho." I lied. I said it clearly. Boise, Idaho. It was absurd. There was no reason to move files to Idaho. I could have moved them to a safety deposit box down the street. But Boise was specific. It was random, and it was a word that had never, ever appeared in any of our legitimate documents. "Why Boise?" Lila asked softly. "Because it is out of the jurisdiction." I improvised. "And because my old college roommate owns the facility. It is the only place I trust. The courier is coming at 6 o'clock tonight. Until then, business as usual. Do not put this in an email. Do not text about it. This conversation never happened." I looked at their faces. Gavin looked terrified. Marcus looked indifferent. Lila looked down at her notebook and scribbled something. "Okay," I said. "Let's get back to work." The waiting was the hardest part. For the next 36 hours, I operated in a state of hypervigilance. I monitored the court docket like a stock trader watching a crash. If the mole was in that room, they would tell Derek, and if Derek was as arrogant and desperate as I thought he was, he wouldn't be able to resist trying to stop me. I sat in my office, watching the clock. 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. Nothing happened. I started to doubt myself. Maybe Gavin hadn't told them. Maybe he was just stealing data for himself, to take to a competitor when the ship sank. Maybe the Boise story was too ridiculous for them to bite. Then, at 9:30 on Friday morning, my computer chimed. Notice of emergency motion for temporary restraining order. I clicked the link, my hand shaking. It was a filing from Miles Croft. Motion to preclude dissipation or transfer of assets. I scrolled down to paragraph 6. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. Paragraph 6. The petitioner has received credible intelligence that the debtor intends to transfer critical business records and physical assets to an undisclosed location outside the state of North Carolina, specifically to a facility in Boise, Idaho, in a deliberate attempt to obstruct the discovery process. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. They took the bait. They swallowed it whole. Boise was in the public record. I picked up the phone and called Dana. "We got them," I said. "They filed against Boise." "I see it," Dana said, her voice sharp with satisfaction. "This is incredible. Madison, they just put their source on the record. No one knew about Boise except the people in that room." "It has to be Gavin," I said. The IT logs showed he downloaded the budget. He has been acting guilty all week, and he was in the meeting. Bring him in, Dana said, but record it. We need a confession. I hung up. I felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a deep, aching sadness. I liked Gavin. I had trusted him. I walked out to the bullpen. Gavin, I said. In my office. Now? He jumped. He actually jumped in his chair. He followed me into my office, looking like a man walking to the gallows. I closed the door. I didn't offer him a seat. Sit down, Gavin, I commanded. He sat. He was wringing his hands. I know, I said simply. Gavin's face crumbled. Madison, I am so sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way. You didn't want me to find out, I asked, my voice rising. You downloaded the budget at 2 a.m. Gavin, you fed the numbers to my brother, and then you told him about Boise. Gavin looked at me, total confusion washing over his panic. What are you talking about? The lawsuit, I snapped. You are the mole. Mole, Gavin stood up, offended now. I am not a mole. I am looking for a new job. I blinked. What? I am looking for a new job, he yelled, then lowered his voice, looking at the door. Look, I have a mortgage. I have twins on the way. The news says you are bankrupt. Jim Vance told me he might not get paid. I got scared. Madison, I was printing my resume. That is what I was doing at the printer. I was taking calls from recruiters in the stairwell. But the login, I said, pointing at the paper on my desk. Your login was used to download the Rivergate budget at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. I was asleep at 2 a.m. last Tuesday, Gavin protested. My wife tracks my sleep on her watch because I snore. I can prove it. Then why does the log say it was you? I don't know, he shouted. I have my password on a sticky note under my keyboard. Half the office knows it because I'm terrible at remembering them. I froze. A sticky note. Under the keyboard. And Boise, I asked. Did you tell anyone about Boise? No. Who would I tell? I don't care where you put the files. I just want to know if my paycheck is going to clear on Friday. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was sweating. Yes, he was guilty. Yes, but he was guilty of disloyalty, not espionage. He was a scared employee trying to abandon a sinking ship, not a saboteur trying to torpedo it. He wasn't the mole. He was the distraction. Gavin, I said slowly, show me the sticky note. We walked out to his desk. He lifted his keyboard. There, stuck to the bottom, was a bright yellow post-it note with his password written in bold Sharpie Rook's Rules 88. Who sits near you? I asked, looking around the open-plan office. Lila is right there. He pointed to the cubicle across the aisle. And Marcus is over there. I looked at the IT report again. The download happened at a workstation, not via VPN. That meant someone was physically in the office at 2 a.m. Gavin, I said, go get the building access logs, not the server logs. The keycard swipes for the front door. Gavin ran to the security desk. He came back 2 minutes later with a printout. I scanned the list for last Tuesday. 02:05 a.m. Entry, cleaning crew. 02:08 a.m. Entry, Lila Grant. I stopped. Lila, my cost controller, the quiet one, the one who cried when her cat died, the one who I had comforted in the break room just last week because she said she was stressed about the audit. She wasn't stressed about the audit. She was stressed because she was stealing my company piece by piece. Where is Lila? I asked, looking at her empty chair. She went to lunch, Gavin said. She took her bag. I looked at the screen of my phone. I had the confirmation about Boise. I had the building swipe log. And I had the realization that the person I had suspected was exactly who they wanted me to suspect. They had used Gavin's account because they knew he was sloppy. They knew I would find the sticky note eventually, or the IT logs would point to him, and I would fire him. If I had fired Gavin, I would have stopped looking, and Lila would have stayed, buried deep in my finance department, bleeding me dry until there was nothing left. Gavin, I said, my voice cold. You are not fired. Yet. But if you ever write a password on a sticky note again, I will personally throw your computer out the window. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. Get Dana on the phone, I said, staring at Lila's empty desk, and tell the security guard to disable Lila Grant's badge. She isn't coming back from lunch. I had found the leak. Now I had to find out why. Lila didn't seem like the type to be bought. She was timid. She was fearful. And that, I realized, was exactly why they picked her. You don't buy a person like Lila with money. You buy her with fear. We had the location of the leak, the physical access to the building at 2 a.m, but in a court of law. Circumstantial evidence is just a story you can't prove. I needed a chain of custody. I needed to trace the poison from my office directly into the veins of Miles Croft's legal filings. So, Dana and I set the final trap. It was a technique known as a canary trap. We created 3 versions of a document titled Internal Solvency Liquidity Forecast. The data in the spreadsheets was identical fake, but identical. The difference was in the prose. In the executive summary of the version I sent to Gavin, I used the phrase capital preservation protocols. In the version sent to Marcus, I used asset shielding measures. And in the version sent to Lila Grant's secure inbox, the phrase was strategic resource isolation. We waited. The waiting was different this time. It wasn't the frantic panic of the first few days. It was the cold, predatory stillness of a hunter sitting in a blind. I watched Lila through the glass walls of my office. She looked terrible. Her skin was the color of old parchment, and she jumped every time the phone rang. She wasn't eating. She was drinking coffee by the gallon. 18 hours after I distributed the documents, a new motion hit the docket. Petitioner's supplemental motion for emergency relief. I didn't even read the whole thing. I hit Control F and typed isolation. There it was, on page 4, paragraph 9. The debtor has admitted in internal communications to engaging in strategic resource isolation, a clear euphemism for hiding assets from creditors. Strategic resource isolation. I felt a heavy, dull thud in my chest. It was the sound of the last bit of trust I had in my team dying. It was Lila. It was definitely, undeniably Lila. Bring her in, Dana said over the speakerphone. And Madison locked the door, I buzzed Lila. Can you come see me for a minute? Bring the solvency report. When she walked in, she looked like she was walking to an execution. She clutched her tablet to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were darting around the room, landing everywhere except on my face. Sit down, Lila, I said. She sat on the edge of the chair, her knees pressed together. Is this about the audit? No, I said. I slid a printout of Derek's motion across the desk. I had highlighted the phrase in neon yellow. It is about strategic resource isolation. Lila froze. She stared at the yellow highlighter. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. This document was filed with the federal court 45 minutes ago, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. That phrase appears in only one document in the world. Lila, the one I sent to you yesterday afternoon. She started to shake. It wasn't a tremble. It was a vibration that rattled the tablet in her hands. I don't know. Don't, I cut her off. Don't lie to me. We have the building logs. We know you were here at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. We know you used Gavin's password. And now, we have this. I leaned forward. You are sending my private financial data to my brother. You are helping him destroy this company. You are helping him destroy me. Why? I expected her to lawyer up. I expected her to get angry. I expected her to tell me that Derek had offered her $50,000 and a job at Monroe Commercial. Instead, she burst into tears. It wasn't a polite cry. It was a guttural, ugly sobbing that doubled her over. She dropped the tablet. She put her face in her hands. I didn't want to, she choked out. I swear to God, Madison, I didn't want to. They made me. Who made you? I asked. Derek. No, she sobbed. Not him. The man. The investigator. I frowned. What investigator? Lila wiped her nose on her sleeve, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. A man called me 3 weeks ago. He said his name was Vargas. He said he worked for a firm called Sentinel Solutions. I have never heard of them, I said. He sent me a file, Lila whispered. She looked up at me, her eyes red and terrified. Madison, you have to understand. Before I got my CPA license when I was 22, I was working as a bookkeeper for a landscaping company in Raleigh. The owner, he was skimming cash. I knew about it. I helped him cover it up because I was scared of him. He got caught. I wasn't charged because I testified, but the ethics board sealed the reprimand. If it comes out, I lose my license. I lose my career. I go to jail for perjury because I lied on my renewal application. I sat back, stunned. And this Vargas knew. He had the file, she said. He had photos of the old ledgers. He told me that if I didn't give him access to Haven Ridge's numbers, he would send everything to the State Board of Accountancy and the district attorney. He said I would be in prison by Christmas. So you gave him my company to save yourself, I said. He said it was just a family dispute, she pleaded. He said your brother just wanted to settle a debt. He said no one would get hurt. He promised. He lied, I said coldly. We are all getting hurt. I pressed the intercom button. Dana, you can come in now. The side door to my office opened, and Dana Whitlock stepped in. She had been listening from the adjacent conference room. She looked at Lila with the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. Ms. Grant, Dana said, placing a recording device on the table. My name is Dana Whitlock. I am Haven Ridge's counsel. You are currently in a great deal of trouble. Corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized computer access. These are felonies. Lila made a small, whimpering sound. However, Dana continued, pulling out a chair and sitting down. We are not interested in putting you in jail. We are interested in the people holding the leash. I can't, Lila stammered. Vargas said, I don't care what Vargas said, Dana snapped. Vargas is a ghost. He is a contractor working for Miles Croft. This is extortion, Ms. Grant, and it is witness tampering. They are using illegal leverage to manufacture evidence for a federal bankruptcy case. That is not just a lawsuit. That is a RICO predicate. Dana leaned in close to Lila. Here is the deal. You are going to sign a sworn affidavit detailing exactly what Vargas said to you. You are going to give us your phone. You are going to give us the emails. You are going to admit to the leak. But my license, Lila whispered. If you help us, Dana said, I will personally seal your file so tight that God himself couldn't find it. But if you protect them, I will make sure you are indicted before the sun goes down. Lila looked at me. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the exhaustion. She was tired of running. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Good, Dana said. She turned to me. Madison, lock her out of the system, but don't fire her. If she disappears, Croft will know the pipeline is cut. We need to keep the line open. We might need to feed them one last piece of information. Fake information, I clarified. Exactly, Dana smiled. We spent the next 2 hours documenting everything. Lila's phone contained a trail of encrypted messages from Vargas, demanding specific files. The dates aligned perfectly with Derek's court filings. It was a smoking gun, and it pointed straight at the unethical underbelly of my family's legal strategy. Lila left the office at 5 o'clock. She was still employed, technically, but her access badge was dead, and her computer was now sitting in Dana's trunk. I was alone in the office, staring at the skyline of Charlotte as the twilight turned the buildings into silhouettes. The betrayal still stung, but at least now I understood the mechanics of it. They weren't fighting me with better business acumen. They were fighting me with fear. My phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down. A text message. From Derek, Mom is a wreck. Maddie. She can't stop crying. This has gone too far. We need to stop the bleeding before the judge makes a ruling that hurts everyone. Meet me at the boathouse tomorrow. Just us. No lawyers. Let's work this out like family. I stared at the screen. Work this out like family. 6 hours ago, His lawyer had filed a motion accusing me of hiding assets, based on data he stole from a terrified employee he was blackmailing, and now he wanted to meet at the boathouse, the place where we used to fish as kids. It was almost impressive how shameless he was. I took a screenshot of the text and sent it to Dana. Her reply came back 10 seconds later. Do not reply. It is a trap. If you meet him without counsel, they will claim you admitted to the debt. They will claim you tried to cut a side deal because you knew you were guilty. I typed back, I know. But why the sudden olive branch? Dana called me immediately. Because they are scared, Madison, she said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the static. The Boise filing was a mistake. They moved too fast. They know that if we dig into where that tip came from, it leads back to their dirty tricks. Derek wants you to settle before we find out about Lila. He wants me to quit, I said. No, Dana said. And then she said the thing that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, the thing that clarified the entire war. He doesn't just want you to quit, Madison. If he just wanted the money, he would have accepted a payment plan. If he just wanted the project, he would have offered a buyout. Then what does he want? Look at the public nature of the filing, Dana said. Look at the leaks to the press. Look at the blackmail. This isn't business. This is an erasure. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy on the line. They want you to be so radioactive, so humiliated, that you don't just lose Rivergate. They want you to lose your standing in this city forever. They want you to be so ashamed that you pack your bags and leave Charlotte, so Derek never has to look at you and be reminded that you are better than him. They don't want to beat you, Madison. They want you to disappear. I looked at the text from Derek again. Just us, family. I realized then that Dana was right. My brother wasn't throwing me a lifeline. He was trying to tie the anchor around my ankles himself, just to make sure the knot was tight. I am not going anywhere, I said to the empty room. I didn't reply to Derek. Instead, I went to the small safe in my office and pulled out the hard drive containing the real Rivergate financials, the ones Lila had never seen, the ones that showed exactly how strong we really were. If they wanted a war of attrition, they had picked the wrong sister. They thought I was drowning. They had no idea I was just holding my breath. The conference room at Whitlock and Associates had become my second home, a sanctuary of mahogany and high billable hour silence where the dissection of my life was taking place. The air conditioner was humming, battling the humidity of the Charlotte afternoon. But inside, the temperature felt like absolute zero. Dana Whitlock walked in, carrying a stack of documents that looked heavy enough to break a toe. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was sleeping. She simply dropped the pile onto the table with a resonant thud that made my coffee cup jump. We got the bank subpoenas back, she said. Her voice was flat, the kind of tone a doctor uses when the test results are complex and terminal. I sat up straighter. And did you find the $4.2 million? No, Dana said. And neither did the bank. She opened the first folder and spread out a series of spreadsheets. They were transaction logs from Wells Fargo, covering every account associated with Derek Monroe and Monroe Commercial Holdings for the last 24 months. We have gone through these line by line, Dana explained, tracing a finger down a column of numbers. We looked for a wire transfer to Haven Ridge. We looked for a cashier's check. We looked for a transfer to a third-party escrow agent. Madison, the money isn't there. There is no debit of $4.2 million from Derek's account. There is no credit to your account. The money is a ghost. So they lied, I said, feeling a surge of vindication. It is over. We take this to the judge, show him the empty accounts, and the case gets dismissed. It is not that simple, Dana said. She pulled another document from the stack. Because this morning, Miles Croft sent over a supplemental evidence package. He claims the bank made an error in their reporting, and he provided this. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a transaction confirmation. It looked official. It had the bank's logo at the top. It showed a wire transfer of $4,200,000 from Derek Monroe, personal, to Haven Ridge Development, operating, dated November 12th, 2 years ago. It had a transaction reference number. It looked unimpeachable. "I don't understand," I said, staring at the paper. "You just said the bank records show nothing, but this says the money moved." "That is a piece of paper," Dana said. "Paper can be printed, paper can be altered. Digital footprints, however, are much harder to scrub." She signaled to the glass wall, where a man I hadn't noticed before was setting up a laptop connected to the room's large monitor. He was young, wearing a hoodie that looked out of place in a law firm, and he had the intense, sleepless look of a forensic data specialist. "This is Aris," Dana introduced him. "Aris, show her the metadata." Aris typed a few commands, and the screen came alive. It showed a breakdown of the file Croft had emailed over the digital version of the transaction receipt. "When you create a file," Aris said, his voice quiet and fast, "the computer leaves a fingerprint. It tells you when it was created, what software was used, and sometimes, whose computer it was on. Now, a real bank confirmation is generated automatically by the bank's server. It is a locked PDF. The author is listed as System, or the bank's name." He pointed to a line of code highlighted in red on the screen. "This file," Aris continued, "was not created by a bank server. It was created using Adobe Acrobat Pro. The creation date was 3 days ago, and the author..." He zoomed in. "Author admin MCH exec 01. "MCH, I whispered. "Monroe Commercial Holdings." "Exactly," Dana said. "This wasn't a receipt downloaded from a banking portal. This was a graphic design project. Someone at your father's company built this document from scratch, likely using an old template, and filled in the numbers they needed. It is a forgery. Madison, a clumsy one." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Forgery was a crime, not a civil dispute, but a crime. "There is more," Dana said. She opened a second folder. "The promissory note, the one with your signature." She placed a high-resolution scan of the signature page on the table. Next to it, she placed another document, a legitimate contract I had signed for a joint venture 3 years ago, unrelated to the family. "I sent these to a handwriting analyst in Atlanta," Dana said. "Look at the loop of the M and the cross of the T. They are mathematically identical. No human signs their name exactly the same way twice. There are always microscopic variations in pressure and angle, but these, if you overlay them, they are a 100% match." "They traced it?" I asked. "They copied and pasted it," Aris corrected. "If you look at the pixelation around the ink in the digital file, you can see a halo of white noise. That happens when you lift a signature from a scanned image and drop it onto a new white background. They took your signature from an old family trust document, cropped it, and pasted it onto this fake loan agreement." I looked at the screen. I saw the jagged, pixelated edge of my own name. It felt like a violation. It felt like someone had stolen my voice. "They are manufacturing evidence," I said slowly. "They are going to prison. They are counting on us settling before anyone looks this close," Dana said. "But here's the question that kept me up last night. Why go to this much trouble? Why forge a wire transfer? Why risk jail time just to bully you out of a project?" She walked to the whiteboard. She uncapped a red marker. "I told Aris to stop looking for a transfer to you," Dana said. "And instead, I told him to look for any movement of $4.2 million in their accounts around that date. Any movement at all." She drew a circle and wrote, "MCH operating account." Then she drew a second circle, "Derek Monroe personal." Then a third circle, "MCH shell account B." "Show her the round trip," Dana commanded. Aris tapped a key. A timeline appeared on the screen. November 12th, 10:04 a.m. Transfer initiated $4,200,000 from Monroe Commercial Holdings to Derek Monroe. November 12th, 10:22 a.m. Transfer initiated $4,200,000 from Derek Monroe to MCH Asset Management, LLC. 18 minutes, Dana said softly. The money sat in Derek's account for exactly 18 minutes. I stared at the timeline. "I don't get it. Why move it just to move it back?" "To create a shadow," Dana explained. They needed a transaction record that showed Derek had $4 million in his account on that day. They created a paper trail, if anyone asked. Did Derek have the money to lend Madison? They could point to that 18-minute window and say, "Yes, look, the funds were there." "But he didn't lend it to me," I said. "He sent it back to the company." "To a different account," Dana corrected. "An account with a different name, to make it look like an expenditure, to make it look like the money went out." "Why?" I asked. "Why did they need to show Derek had money 2 years ago?" "That is what I couldn't figure out," Dana said, "until I pulled the public filings for Monroe Commercial Holdings debt covenants with their primary lender, Liberty Regional Bank." She drew a line at the bottom of the board. "Your father's company has a liquidity covenant," she said, speaking in the rapid-fire cadence of a prosecutor closing a case. "It requires the company to maintain a certain cash balance at the end of every quarter. If they dip below $5 million in liquid cash, the bank can call their loans. They can foreclose on everything." She turned to me. 2 years ago, in November, your father's company was broke. Madison, they were below the threshold. If the bank saw their real balance, they would have seized the assets. So, they did a round trip. They moved money around to artificially inflate the daily balance of different accounts just long enough to print a statement for the bank auditors. They were cooking the books. I felt the room spin. "They weren't just trying to trick me," I whispered. "They were tricking the bank." "Exactly," Dana said. "And now, fast forward to today, the interest rates have doubled. Their vacancies are up. The bank is sniffing around again. They are desperate. They are drowning." She slammed her hand on the table. "They don't just want Rivergate because it is a trophy. They need Rivergate's $120 million capital injection to plug the hole in their own sinking ship. If they don't get control of your project's assets within the next 90 days, Monroe Commercial Holdings is going to collapse." I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silence. It all made sense. The desperation, the sloppiness, the viciousness. They weren't attacking me because I was the rebellious daughter. They were attacking me because I was the only asset they had left to cannibalize. My father, the man who lectured me on risk and prudence, he had been running a shell game for years, moving the same pile of cash between accounts to fool the bank. And now that the music was stopping, he was trying to shove me into the empty chair. "They are going to use my bankruptcy to hide their own," I realized aloud. "If they take over Rivergate, they can commingle the funds. They can pay off their loans with my city grant money. And you go down for embezzlement when the city finds out." Dana finished the thought. "You are the scapegoat, Madison. You are the human shield." I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just greed. It was a complete, sociopathic lack of love. My father was willing to send me to prison to save his reputation. There was a knock on the door. Dana's assistant poked her head in. "Madison," she said hesitantly. "A courier just dropped this off. He said it was urgent. It isn't from the court." She handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy. The paper was expensive, old-fashioned stock. I turned it over. There was no return address, just my name, handwritten in blue fountain pen ink. I recognized the handwriting immediately, but it wasn't my father's, and it wasn't Derek's. It was my Aunt Marin's. I tore open the seal. Inside was not a letter, but a photocopy of an old yellow document and a small handwritten note from Marin clipped to the front. I read the note first. "Madison, I found this in your grandfather's safe deposit box years ago. I made a copy because I knew, one day, the boys would lose their way. I think it is time you knew what the foundation of this family was actually supposed to be. Don't let them win." I unfolded the photocopy. It was a handwritten set of bylaws for the original Monroe Trust, dated 40 years ago. My grandfather's handwriting was spidery but forceful. I scanned the paragraphs until my eyes landed on Clause 7. Clause 7. No beneficiary of this trust shall use the assets, influence, or name of the family to intentionally harm, defraud, or litigate against another blood member of the Monroe line. Any such action, upon proof, shall result in the immediate and permanent disinheritance of the aggressor, and their portion of the trust shall be redistributed to the victim. I stared at the words. My father knew this. Derek might not, but my father absolutely knew this. He was the executor. He had buried this clause. He had ignored it. What is it? Dana asked. Seeing the look on my face, I handed her the paper. My grandfather wrote a poison pill into the family trust, I said. If a family member uses the family money to attack another family member, they lose their inheritance. Dana read it. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. Is this trust still active? She asked. Yes, I said. It holds the title to the land the commercial centers are built on. It is the bedrock of their equity. Madison, Dana said, looking up. This isn't just a defense anymore. If we prove they filed a fraudulent lawsuit, which we can, with the metadata and the signature, and we present this clause to the probate court, we don't just win the lawsuit, I said, my voice steady. We take away their company. I looked at the pixelated signature on the screen, the fake loan, the stolen identity, the 18-minute round trip that proved my father was a fraud. For my entire life, I had tried to be the good Monroe. I had tried to keep the peace. I had eaten their insults at Sunday dinner. I had let them belittle my work. Even when they sued me, part of me had just wanted them to stop, to go away, so I could get back to building. But they hadn't stopped. They had tried to kill me, not physically, but socially, professionally, and financially. They had tried to erase my existence to cover their own failures. I thought about the face of the family, the dignity, the reputation. Dana, I said. Yes. File the motion, I said. File everything, the metadata, the forgery analysis, the round-trip logs, and file a counterclaim for the activation of Clause 7 of the Monroe Trust. This will destroy them publicly, Dana warned. Once this hits the record, the banks will call their loans within 24 hours. Your father will be ruined. Derek will be uninsurable. There is no coming back from this. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, the Rivergate site was waiting for me. It was a mess of mud and steel, but it was honest. It was real. They didn't care about ruining me, I said. They didn't care about my reputation. They were willing to let me go to jail for a crime they committed. I turned back to Dana. I am done keeping their secrets. I am done being the daughter who cleans up the mess. If they want to play games with the family legacy, let's show the judge what that legacy actually looks like. Dana nodded. She looked at Iris. Pack it up. We have a brief to write. I picked up the photocopy of my grandfather's note. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. I wasn't doing this for revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was simply a correction. The data showed a structural failure in the Monroe family, and as any good developer knows, when a building is structurally unsound, you don't paint over the cracks. You demolish it. The momentum in a courtroom is a physical thing. You can feel it shift, like the cabin pressure in an airplane dropping before a storm. For the first 2 days of this hearing, the air had been pushing against me, heavy with the accusation that I was a failure who had burned through family money. But as Dana Whitlock stood up on the third morning, the air changed. It became thin, sharp, and electrified. We were not there to defend anymore. We were there to hunt. Dana walked to the podium, not with a stack of papers, but with a single, slim motion in her hand. She placed it before Judge Leland Hart, with the reverence of a priest placing an offering on an altar. "Your Honor," Dana said, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the gallery. "The defense moves to dismiss this involuntary petition with prejudice. Furthermore, we are filing a motion for immediate sanctions against the petitioner and their counsel for the submission of fraudulent evidence, subornation of perjury, and bad faith litigation." Miles Croft shot out of his seat like he had been electrocuted. "Objection. This is grandstanding. The defense is trying to distract the court from the debtor's insolvency. The only thing insolvent here, Your Honor," Dana said, not even looking at Croft. "Is the truth of the petitioner's claims—" Judge Hart looked over his glasses. He was a man who hated drama, but he hated being lied to even more. He signaled for Croft to sit down. "I will hear the basis for the motion. Ms. Whitlock, proceed." Dana turned to the projection screen. "Your Honor, 3 days ago, the petitioner filed an emergency request to stop my client from moving assets to a storage facility in Boise, Idaho. They claimed this was based on credible intelligence regarding the dissipation of assets. I recall," the judge said. "I signed the temporary order based on that claim." "We would like to present Exhibit C," Dana said. On the screen, the email I had sent to the 3 specific employees appeared. The text was highlighted. The location Boise, Idaho was glowing in neon yellow. "This email," Dana explained, "was a fabrication. It was a canary trap. There is no storage unit in Boise. There are no files in Boise. My client invented this location and shared it with exactly 3 people in a sealed room to identify a leak within her company. 36 hours later, that fictional detail appeared word for word in Mr. Croft's filing." The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the hard drives in the stenographer's machine. "This proves," Dana continued, pacing slowly before the bench, "that the petitioner is not basing their case on financial audits or public records. They are basing it on corporate espionage. They are receiving stolen, privileged communications from a mole within Haven Ridge Development." Croft was pale. He began to stack his papers, a nervous tic I had noticed earlier. "Your Honor, we received tips from concerned whistleblowers. That is standard practice." "Is blackmail standard practice, Mr. Croft?" Dana asked. She didn't give him time to answer. She flashed the next slide. It was the affidavit from Lila Grant. It was redacted to protect her identity, but the content was brutal. "We have sworn testimony from the employee in question," Dana said. "She admits to leaking the information, but she did not do it voluntarily. She did it because she was contacted by a private investigation firm called Sentinel Solutions, acting on behalf of the petitioner. She was threatened with the exposure of a sealed personnel file from a decade ago if she did not comply." Dana turned to look directly at Derek. "This is not a bankruptcy case, Your Honor. This is a criminal conspiracy to cripple a competitor using extortion and theft." Derek sat frozen. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the judge. He was staring at the table. His jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches while the house was already on fire. "Mr. Croft," Judge Hart said. His voice was incredibly soft, which was terrifying. "Did your firm hire Sentinel Solutions?" Croft tugged at his collar. "Your Honor, we engage various contractors for asset tracing. I cannot speak to the specific tactics used by third parties without consulting my files." "You filed the motion based on their fruit," the judge snapped. "You are responsible for the tree. If this affidavit is accurate, you are looking at disbarment, counselor, not to mention federal charges. We move to seal these documents," Croft blurted out, "to protect the privacy of the parties involved." "Denied," Judge Hart said instantly. "You chose to drag Ms. Cook into a public forum to humiliate her. You do not get to hide in the dark when the lights turn on." Dana pressed the advantage. She knew we had them on the ropes, but she wanted a knockout. She shifted the narrative from the personal to the political. "Your Honor, this court must also consider the public interest. The petitioner is asking you to freeze the assets of the lead developer for the Rivergate renewal. This is a project backed by $120 million in municipal bonds and private equity. Every day this frivolous suit continues. The city loses money, contractors are paused, material costs rise. The petitioner claims Ms. Cook is reckless," Dana said, pointing at Derek. "They claim she is incompetent. Yet, here is the independent audit from the city's oversight committee. Dated last month." She slapped a heavy document on the bench. "Haven Ridge received a perfect score on fiscal management. We are under budget and ahead of schedule. The only threat to this project is the interference of a jealous competitor who happens to share a last name with my client. Derek suddenly stood up. He couldn't help himself. The narcissism that had been fed to him since birth wouldn't let him sit there and take it. "She is reckless," Derek shouted, ignoring Croft's hand grabbing his arm. "She is leveraging everything. She doesn't have the capital reserves. If she hits one snag, the whole thing collapses. I was trying to save the family name from her ego." I sat perfectly still. I didn't look at him. I didn't roll my eyes. I let his voice echo in the room, shrill and desperate, in a courtroom. The person who screams first is the person who has already lost. "Sit down, Mr. Monroe," Judge Hart ordered. "One more outburst and I will have you removed." Derek slumped back into his chair. He looked small. The expensive suit didn't make him look powerful anymore. It made him look like a boy playing dress-up. Dana waited a beat, letting Derek's tantrum hang in the air like a bad smell. Then she delivered the final blow. "Mr. Monroe speaks of capital reserves," Dana said calmly, "and he speaks of honesty. So let us look at the evidence of the debt itself." The screen changed again. It showed the wire transfer confirmation, the one they had forged, the one with the $4.2 million figure. "The petitioner submitted this document as proof of a loan," Dana said. "It looks very official. It has the bank logo. It has the transaction codes." She zoomed in on the bottom left corner of the document. "However," Dana said, "we had a forensic document examiner analyze the file structure, and we noticed something interesting about the font used for the transaction numbers." I watched the gallery. In the third row, a woman with a press badge, a reporter for the Charlotte Business Journal, leaned forward. She squinted at the screen. Then she whispered something to the man next to her. The whisper traveled. "The font," Dana said, "is Helvetica Neue, specifically the 14-point bold variation." She clicked the clicker. A new document appeared side by side with the fake receipt. It was a standard invoice from Monroe Commercial Holdings. "This is an internal invoice from the petitioner's company," Dana said. "Note the font, note the spacing, note the specific way the date is formatted with dashes instead of slashes." "It is a template," Dana declared. "The document submitted to this court was not generated by Wells Fargo. It was generated by the finance department of Monroe Commercial Holdings. They used their own corporate invoice template to forge a bank receipt, and they forgot to change the default font settings." A gasp went through the room. It wasn't theatrical. It was the genuine shock of people witnessing something incredibly stupid and incredibly illegal. The reporter in the third row was typing furiously on her phone. I could see the headline forming in her mind: "Monroe Air forges bank docs in court battle." "Mr. Croft," Judge Hart said. He wasn't looking at the documents anymore. He was looking at the lawyer with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Do you have the original, bank-certified metadata for this transfer, not the printout, the digital key?" Croft stood up. He was shaking. "Your Honor, there seem to have been administrative errors in the compilation of the exhibits. I request a continuance to clarify the record." "There is no record to clarify," Dana said, "because the money never moved to my client. We have the logs." She put up the timeline of the 18-minute round trip, the money going from the company to Derek, and then back to the company shell account. "They moved their own money in a circle to create a ghost," Dana said. "They didn't lend Madison Cook a dime. They used her name to launder their own liquidity crisis, and now they are using this court to steal her project to cover their losses." The puzzle was complete. The picture was clear. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a heist. I turned my head slowly to the right. I looked past Derek. I looked past the trembling lawyer. I looked at my parents. My mother was staring at her lap, twisting a ring on her finger so hard I thought the skin would break. She knew. She had to know. You don't live in a house for 40 years without knowing how the bills are paid. And then I looked at my father. He was standing, but he was leaning heavily on the back of the bench in front of him. His face was gray. For my entire life, my father had been a monolith, unshakable, terrifying, correct. He was the man who told me I was too emotional for business. He was the man who told me I needed to be protected. But in that moment, Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the federal court, the monolith cracked. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I didn't see judgment. I saw panic. He wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at the person who held the axe that was about to bring down his entire world. He looked old. He looked frail. He looked like a man who realized that the safety he had tried to force on me was actually the only thing keeping him afloat, and he had just severed the line. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I just held his gaze. I let him see that I knew everything. I let him see that the daughter he had dismissed as a librarian was the one who had just read him his rights. Dana closed her binder. The sound was final. "We rest our motion, Your Honor," she said. The judge looked at the clock. Then he looked at Derek and my father. "We will recess for 1 hour," Judge Hart said. "When we return, I expect Mr. Croft to have a very good explanation for why I shouldn't refer this entire table to the U.S. Attorney's Office for fraud." He banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Derek put his head in his hands. My father slumped back onto the bench, and I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and walked out of the courtroom into a hallway that was suddenly flashing with the lights of cameras that were no longer there to capture my shame, but to document their fall. The night before the final hearing, the silence in my apartment was heavy enough to break the floorboards. I was sitting on my living room rug, surrounded by exhibit binders, staring at the skyline of Charlotte. The city looked peaceful, a grid of amber and white lights, completely indifferent to the fact that my life was being dismantled in a federal building 3 miles away. My phone rang at 11:14 at night. I knew who it was before I looked. It was the specific, shrill vibration of a family emergency. I picked it up. "Hello, Mother. You have to stop this," she said. There was no greeting. Her voice was wet and jagged, the sound of a woman who had been crying for hours, or perhaps drinking, or both. "Madison, you have to withdraw the motion. You have to tell the judge it was a misunderstanding." "I didn't file the lawsuit, Mom," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Derek did. He is the one who needs to withdraw." "He can't," she shrieked, the facade of the composed matriarch shattering completely. "If he withdraws now, he admits guilt. The banks will see it. They will call the loans on the shopping centers. We will lose the house. We will lose the club memberships. Do you understand if you don't stop this, you are going to kill this family?" "I am not killing the family," I said. "I am stopping the family from killing me." "You are so selfish," she hissed, the sorrow instantly hardening into venom. "You always were. You think you are so special with your little company. Your father is in the study clutching his chest. If he has a heart attack tonight, that is on you. That is on your conscience." "If he has a heart attack," I said, feeling a coldness spread through my limbs that I had never felt before. "It is because he realized he bet on the wrong child." I hung up. I turned off the phone. But the silence didn't come back. The air was vibrating with the ghost of her accusation. "You will kill this family." An hour later, my building's intercom buzzed. I looked at the monitor. It was my father. He wasn't clutching his chest. He was standing in the lobby, wearing his trench coat, looking up at the camera with a face that seemed carved from gray stone. I buzzed him in. I didn't offer him a drink. We stood in my kitchen, the island between us like a barricade. "You look tired," he said. It was a reflex, a phantom limb of parental concern that didn't connect to anything real. "I am fighting a federal lawsuit, Dad," I said. "It is exhausting." He sighed and placed his hands on the marble counter. "Madison, look, we have let this get out of hand. Lawyers, they escalate things. They make enemies out of blood. I don't want that. I don't want to see my children tearing each other apart in public." "Then tell Derek to admit the loan is fake," I said. "He can't do that," my father said quickly. "You know he can't. It would ruin him." "And what about me?" I asked. "What about my ruin?" "You were fine with me being destroyed. You were fine with me going to prison for hiding assets I never had." "It wouldn't have come to prison," he said dismissively. We would have handled it. We would have structured a settlement once the project was transferred. You would have been fine. You are resilient. Madison, you always land on your feet. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to accept this twisted logic. Derek, he is not like you. He is fragile. He needs the win. You don't need it. You have the talent to build something else. So I should die so he can live, I summarized. You win. What do you get? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. You get a judgment. You get money. But you lose us. You lose your seat at the table. Madison, honey, you are still a Monroe. Don't saw off the branch you're sitting on. I'm not sitting on your branch, I said. I planted my own tree 5 years ago. You just came to chop it down. He stared at me for a long time. Then he stepped aside, towards the living room. I brought someone. We need to settle this tonight. The front door, which I had left unlocked for him, opened. Derek walked in. He didn't look like the arrogant prince who had whispered threats in the courtroom. He looked haggard. He smelled of scotch and mints. He walked to the kitchen island and stood next to our father, presenting a united front of male incompetence. Maddie, Derek said. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. Look, Dad is right. The lawyers are getting rich, and we are getting screwed. I have a proposal. He slid a document across the counter. It wasn't filed by Miles Croft. It was a single page, drafted on plain paper. We drop the involuntary bankruptcy petition immediately, Derek said. We issue a joint statement saying the accounting discrepancy has been resolved amicably. Your reputation is cleared. The case goes away tomorrow morning. I looked at the paper. And in exchange, Derek said, tapping the bottom paragraph, you appoint Monroe Commercial Holdings as the managing partner of the Rivergate Renewal Project. You stay on as lead consultant. You keep your salary. You keep the design credit. But we handle the financials. We handle the administration. I read the text. Transfer of executive control. It was a trap. A beautiful, shiny, deadly trap. If I sign this, I said, looking up, I am admitting that I can't handle the project. I am admitting that I need a managing partner to save me. The city will see this and think I nearly went under, and you get access to the $120 million in project funds to cover your bad loans. We save the family business, my father interjected. And you keep your company. Everyone wins. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Dana. I had texted her the moment my father buzzed the intercom. I glanced at the screen. Dana, do not sign anything. It is a confession. If you sign that, they will use it to validate the insolvency claim later. They will say you capitulated because you were broke. It validates their lie. I looked at my brother. You don't want to save me, I said. You want to steal the project. You are just trying to do it with a pen instead of a judge because you know you are going to lose in court tomorrow. You are being stubborn, Derek shouted, the nice guy mask slipping instantly. You are going to humiliate us all. Do you know what happens if the judge rules fraud? Do you know what happens to the trust? I froze. The trust. Derek looked at Dad. Dad looked away. What about the trust? I asked. My father swallowed hard. Nothing, just the reputation damage. But it wasn't nothing. Just then, my laptop on the coffee table pinged. It was a priority email notification. I walked over to it. It was from Aunt Marin. Subject the clause. The smoking gun. I opened it. There were 2 attachments. The first was a formal legal opinion from the trustee of the Monroe Family Trust, the bank that held the title to every piece of land my father claimed to own. I read the summary. Pursuant to Article 7 of the Monroe Trust bylaws, any beneficiary found by a court of law to have engaged in fraud, extortion, or malicious litigation against another blood beneficiary shall be immediately and permanently stripped of all rights, income, and future inheritance. The forfeited share shall be redistributed to the victim. I looked up at them. You aren't scared of the reputation damage, I said softly. You are scared of Article 7. Derek went white. How do you know about Article 7? Grandfather knew you, I said. He knew someone like you would be born. He wrote a poison pill into the legacy. If you lose tomorrow, if the judge rules that you forged those documents, you don't just lose the lawsuit, you lose your inheritance, you lose the company, you lose everything. That is why you have to sign, my father pleaded, stepping toward me. Madison, please, he is your brother. You can't let him be destitute. If you sign the settlement, there is no court ruling, there is no fraud on the record. The trust is safe. You want me to hand over my hard work, I said, my voice shaking with rage, to save the inheritance of the man who tried to destroy me. He made a mistake, my father yelled. He didn't make a mistake, I said. He made a plan. I clicked the second attachment in Marin's email. It was a forwarded email chain. The subject line was Operation Shutdown. The date was 6 months ago, long before the alleged loan became an issue, long before the Rivergate bid was even won. It was an email from Derek to Miles Croft. Email text. We need a contingency plan for Madison. If she actually wins the Rivergate bid, she becomes too big to control. We need a way to freeze her accounts immediately. Can we draft a bankruptcy petition in advance? We can fill in the debt details later. I need her paralyzed the moment the city writes her a check. I stared at the screen. He hadn't reacted to a debt. He hadn't reacted to a crisis. He had been planning to execute me from the moment I started to succeed. He had been waiting with a knife in the dark for half a year. I looked at Derek. He saw the screen. He saw the header. He knew I had the email. Who sent you that? He whispered. Does it matter? I asked. It exists. I looked at my father. Did you know? My father didn't answer. He looked at the floor. That was my answer. He knew. He had probably approved the legal retainer. For 3 seconds, the room was absolutely silent. In those 3 seconds, I felt something break inside me. It wasn't my resolve. It was the last, lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding, that maybe they loved me in some twisted, broken way, but they didn't. They looked at me and saw a resource to be exploited or a threat to be neutralized. They had planned my destruction over business lunches. Get out, I said. Madison, my father started. Get out, I screamed. It was the first time I had raised my voice in years. It came from the bottom of my lungs, a release of 30 years of being the quiet one, the obedient one, the one at the kids' table. Get out of my house, get out of my company, and tell your lawyer to bring his toothbrush tomorrow, because after I show this email to the judge, he is not going home. Derek looked at me with pure hatred. You are going to regret this. You are going to be all alone. I have been alone in this family for my entire life, I said. I just didn't realize it until now. They left. The door clicked shut. I stood there in the silence, trembling. I walked to the window and looked out at the city again. I felt lighter. The heaviness of the obligation, the guilt of the daughter, the fear of their disapproval, it was all gone. They had played their final card. They had tried to use love as a weapon, but the gun was empty. I sat down at my laptop and forwarded the email chain to Dana Whitlock. Subject, the final nail, message. No settlements, no mercy. We finish it. I didn't sleep that night. I showered, dressed in my sharpest navy suit, and drank black coffee while watching the sun rise over the buildings I was going to build. When I walked into the courthouse the next morning, I didn't look at the floor. I didn't look for my parents in the gallery. I walked straight to the plaintiff's table, paused, and looked Derek in the eye. He looked like a ghost. He knew what was coming. Good morning, Derek, I said. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked to my seat, opened my file, and waited for the judge to ask the question that would end the Monroe family as we knew it. The final day of the hearing did not begin with a bang. It began with the desperate, grinding sound of Miles Croft trying to reassemble a narrative that had already shattered into dust. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the collective body heat of reporters, creditors, and the curious elite of Charlotte who had come to watch the Monroe dynasty devour itself. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture rigid, staring at a spot on the wall as if he could bore a hole through it and escape. My parents were behind him, no longer playing the role of the aggrieved nobility. They looked small. They looked like people waiting for a biopsy result they already knew was malignant. Croft was at the podium, sweating through his silk collar. "Your Honor," Croft stammered, shuffling papers that seemed to tremble in his hands. "While the defense has engaged in theatrical distractions, we must return to the core issue. Insolvency is not just a matter of bank balances, it is a matter of trajectory. We argue that Haven Ridge's rapid expansion constitutes a fiduciary risk. The $4.2 million loan was a stabilizer. The fact that Ms. Cook refuses to acknowledge it proves she is in denial about her company's health." He was repeating the same lines from day one. It was pathetic. It was the sound of a man who had no cards left but refused to fold because he knew the house owner was watching. Judge Leland Hart did not look impressed. He was leaning back in his leather chair, tapping a pen against his chin. He let Croft ramble for another 2 minutes before he leaned forward. "Mr. Croft," the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it silenced the room instantly. "You keep using that word. Insolvent." "Yes, Your Honor," Croft said, blinking rapidly. "I have a question," the judge continued, picking up a thick file from his bench, the binder Dana had submitted on the first day. "This court deals with bankruptcies every day. Usually, the debtor is hiding from creditors. Usually, the debtor has no contracts. Yet, here we have a debtor who was, just last month, awarded the Rivergate Renewal Project." The judge opened the file. "I have reviewed the city's vetting process. It is exhaustive. They audited Ms. Cook's financials for 6 months. They checked her liquidity, they checked her credit, and then they handed her a contract capitalized at $120 million. Judge Hart took off his glasses and stared at Croft. "Are you suggesting, Counselor, that the City of Charlotte, the Municipal Bond Authority, and the private equity partners are all incompetent? Are you suggesting they all missed this insolvency that only your client seems to see?" "Well, Your Honor," Croft stuttered. "Government bureaucracy can be slow. They may not have seen the hidden risks." "Hidden risks," the judge repeated, "or hidden agendas. Ms. Whitlock," the judge nodded to my table. "You may proceed." Dana stood up. She didn't walk to the podium. She stood right next to me, a visual anchor of support. "Thank you, Your Honor," Dana said. "Mr. Croft talks about hidden things. We would like to bring a few of them into the light." She pointed to the large projection screen. "First," Dana said, "let us address the source of the petitioner's so-called intelligence." The screen flashed. It was the email I had sent about the Boise storage unit. "This court issued a temporary restraining order based on the petitioner's claim that my client was moving assets to Boise, Idaho," Dana said. "A claim that appeared in their filing 36 hours after my client sent this email to exactly 3 people. There is no storage unit in Boise," Dana declared, her voice ringing off the mahogany walls. It was a trap, a fiction created to catch a spy, and the petitioner walked right into it. She clicked the remote. The screen changed to the building access logs. "We have sworn testimony from Ms. Lila Grant, a former employee of Haven Ridge," Dana continued. "She admits to accessing the network unauthorized at 2 a.m. She admits to downloading the specific financial files that ended up in Mr. Monroe's possession, and she admits she did so because she was being blackmailed by an investigator hired by Mr. Croft's firm." A murmur rippled through the gallery. I saw my mother put a hand over her mouth. "This is not due diligence, Your Honor," Dana said. "This is corporate espionage. This is witness tampering, and it renders every single piece of evidence submitted by the petitioner fruit of the poisonous tree." Croft jumped up. "Objection. This is hearsay. Ms. Grant is a disgruntled employee. Ms. Grant is a cooperating witness who has turned over her text messages," Dana shot back. "Would you like me to play the voicemail your investigator left her threatening her accounting license?" Croft sat down, He looked like he was going to be sick. But let us go deeper, Dana said. Let us look at the loan itself. The $4.2 million. The screen changed again. It showed the metadata report for the wire transfer confirmation. Mr. Croft submitted this document as proof of payment, Dana said. But the metadata shows it was created 3 days ago on a computer registered to Monroe Commercial Holdings. It was created using a template. It is a forgery. And the signature on the promissory note. Dana clicked again. The pixelated halo around my name appeared. It was lifted from a trust document dated 10 years ago. My client never signed this note. It is a cut-and-paste job. I looked at Derek. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at his hands. He was trembling. So we have espionage, Dana summarized. We have forgery. We have blackmail. But the question remains, why? Why would a wealthy real estate family go to such criminal lengths to destroy their own daughter's company? Dana turned to the judge. We found the answer in the bank records of the petitioner. The screen changed to a timeline. It was the 18-minute round-trip graphic. On November 12th, 2 years ago, the date of the alleged loan, Monroe Commercial Holdings transferred $4.2 million to Derek Monroe's personal account, Dana explained. 18 minutes later, Derek Monroe transferred that same amount back to a shell company owned by the parent firm. Why move the money in a circle? Dana asked rhetorically. She clicked the final slide. It was a screenshot of a loan covenant from Liberty Regional Bank. Because on that day, Dana said, pointing to the date, Monroe Commercial Holdings was facing a liquidity audit. If their cash on hand dropped below $5 million, they would default on their primary loans. They moved the money to create a snapshot, a moment in time where Derek looked liquid, and the company looked like it had expenses. It was accounting fraud to fool their own bank. The gasps in the room were audible now. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was bank fraud. This was federal prison territory. And today, Dana continued, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. Today, Monroe Commercial is facing that same liquidity crisis again. Interest rates are up. Their malls are empty. They are drowning. She turned and pointed an accusing finger straight at my father. They didn't sue Madison Cook because she owed them money. They sued her because she won the Rivergate project. They needed to seize control of her company so they could access the $120 million in city funds to pay off their own toxic debt. They weren't trying to save her. They were trying to use her as a human shield to save themselves. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Judge Hart looked at the screen. He looked at the metadata. He looked at the 18-minute loop. And then he looked at Derek Monroe. Mr. Monroe, the judge said. Do you have anything to say? Derek opened his mouth. He looked at Croft. Croft stared at the table. He looked at our father. Our father was staring at the floor. A broken, gray man. Derek croaked. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Judge Hart repeated. He sounded tired. You forged a signature. You forged a bank wire. You blackmailed a witness. You filed a false petition in federal court. And you tried to destroy a legitimate business for your own gain. The judge picked up his gavel. He didn't slam it. He held it, weighing it. This court finds the involuntary petition filed by Derek Monroe to be without merit. Judge Hart ruled. It is dismissed with prejudice. That means you cannot refile it, ever. He turned a page in his notebook. Furthermore, due to the egregious nature of the bad faith litigation, the fraud on the court, and the criminal implications of the evidence presented, I am sanctioning the petitioner for the full amount of the debtor's legal fees, and, the judge continued, his eyes locking onto Miles Croft, I am referring the entire record of this proceeding, including the metadata regarding the forgery and the witness tampering allegations, to the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina for criminal investigation. We are adjourned, the judge said. He banged the gavel. For a moment, no one moved. The sound rang in the air, final and devastating. Then, The chaos started. Reporters jumped up, rushing for the doors to file their stories. The gallery erupted in whispers. I stood up. I felt light, physically light. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since I was a child, the weight of needing their approval, of fearing their judgment was gone. I looked at the table across the aisle. Derek was still sitting there. He looked like he had been hollowed out. He wasn't just a man who had lost a lawsuit. He was a man who had just realized that the Clause 7 of the grandfather's trust was about to kick in. He had used family money to attack family. He was disinherited. He was broke, and he was likely going to be indicted. My mother was weeping. But it wasn't the performance she had given on day one. This was real. She was crying for the country club membership she would lose. She was crying for the face that had just been ripped off. My father finally looked up. He met my eyes. I didn't see the titan of industry anymore. I saw a fraud. I saw a man who had been playing a shell game for 40 years and had finally run out of shells. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and pleading, as if he expected me to fix it, as if he expected the dutiful daughter to step in and say, "It is okay, Dad. I will pay the bill." But I wasn't that daughter anymore. I turned to Dana. "Thank you," I said. "You earned it," she said, closing her briefcase. "You built the truth. I just presented it." I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't stop to talk to the press. I didn't stop to gloat at my brother. I walked down the marble hallway, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. Outside, the sun was blindingly bright. The humidity of Charlotte hit me, thick and familiar. I took a deep breath. It smelled of exhaust and honeysuckle and wet concrete. It smelled like work. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had 17 missed calls from my mother. I blocked the number. Then I blocked my father. Then Derek. I opened my email and sent a message to my team at Haven Ridge. "The suit is dismissed. We won. Get the crews back to Rivergate. We have concrete to pour at Oro 700 tomorrow." I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. Exactly. I felt clean. I felt like a building that had been stripped down to the steel, the rotten wood removed, the weak foundation dug out and replaced with stone. I walked to my car, got in, and drove toward the river. I had a project to build. I had a skyline to change. And for the first time in my life, the name on the building wasn't going to be Monroe. It was going to be mine. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long road to justice, but standing in that courtroom was worth every second of the struggle. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving, working, or just relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below. I love reading your stories. If you enjoyed this victory, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to know that sometimes the truth really does win. Stay strong.